In the busy city of Silvercrest, cars honked and people hurried through the rain. Inside the big white building of Silvercrest General Hospital, two women were about to bring new lives into the world. One of them was Clara Okafor, a middle-class woman who worked as a teacher. She and her husband, Chike, had prayed for a child for many years. They didn't have much, but they loved each other deeply. The other woman was Ruth Raymond, Clara's old friend from school. Ruth was married to a rich businessman, and everyone in Silvercrest admired her beautiful house, her nice cars, and her kind heart. That stormy night, both women gave birth to baby boys, only a few minutes apart. The hospital was noisy with thunder and the cries of newborns. But in Clara's room, the sound was weak. Her baby's cry came out soft and shaky, like a whisper carried away by the wind. When the doctor came in, his face looked serious. "Mrs. Okafor," he said gently, "your baby is having trouble breathing. We'll do everything we can." Clara's heart broke into 1,000 pieces. She looked at her tiny son, so small, so fragile. Tubes were attached to his nose. His chest rose and fell slowly, as if every breath was a struggle. Chike squeezed her hand, tears filling his eyes. "He'll make it," he whispered, but his voice trembled. Meanwhile, in another room, Ruth's baby was strong and healthy. Nurses smiled as they handed him to her. "Congratulations, Mrs. Raymond," they said. "He's perfect." Later that evening, Ruth visited Clara. She carried her healthy son, wrapped in a soft blue blanket. The baby's cheeks were full and pink. "Oh, Clara," Ruth said kindly, "don't worry. Your little boy will get better soon. Have faith." Clara forced a smile. "Thank you, Ruth," she said softly, though her eyes were heavy with pain. But when Ruth left, the room felt empty again. Outside, lightning flashed across the sky. The sound of rain against the windows was the only thing that kept Clara company. Hours passed. Nurses came and went. The lights flickered as the storm worsened. Clara could not sleep. Her baby's weak breathing echoed in her ears, and fear sat heavy in her chest. She thought about all the bills piling up. Chike's small salary could barely cover food and rent. If her son didn't get better soon, how would they even pay for his treatment? Then a terrible thought crept into her mind, one she wished had never appeared. What if my son could have Ruth's life? She sat up quickly, frightened by her own imagination. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "That's impossible. That's wickedness." But the thought did not go away. It stayed there, whispering over and over. Ruth had everything. Money. Comfort. A strong baby boy who would grow up to inherit all of it. And Clara. She had nothing but pain and fear of losing her child. By midnight, the storm outside had grown louder. Nurses were busy running around because the electricity kept blinking off and on. The hallway lights glowed dimly. Clara looked at her son. He was barely breathing now. She felt her throat tighten. Then, as thunder cracked across the sky, she stood up. Slowly. Quietly. Her heart pounded like a drum inside her chest. She wrapped her baby in a small white cloth and stepped out of her room. Ruth's room was only 2 doors away. The door was slightly open. Inside, Ruth was asleep, her baby lying in a small crib beside her bed. The baby's face was peaceful, his tiny hands curled softly. Clara stepped closer. The sound of her heartbeat was louder than the rain. She whispered, "I'm sorry. I can't lose him. I can't." Her hands shook as she lifted Ruth's healthy baby. For a moment, she froze, her eyes full of tears, her lips trembling. But desperation pushed her forward. She placed her sick child gently in Ruth's crib and held Ruth's baby close to her chest. When she returned to her room, she looked at the new baby in her arms. He was warm and breathing well. Her tears fell on his soft cheek. Then, not long after, a nurse came running down the hallway. Clara heard voices shouting, "Code Blue! Code Blue!" from Ruth's room. Her knees grew weak. She didn't need to ask what had happened. Her real baby, the one she had just left behind, had taken his last breath. Clara covered her mouth with shaking hands. The world spun around her. She wanted to scream, but no sound came out. At that moment, thunder roared so loudly it shook the windows. And somewhere deep inside her, she knew she had done something that would never stay buried forever. The storm outside ended the next morning, but a darker storm had just begun inside Clara's heart. 10 years had passed since that stormy night at Silvercrest Hospital. The city had grown brighter, busier, and louder. Tall buildings stood where old houses used to be, and cars filled the streets from morning till night. In a small yellow-painted house at the edge of the city lived Clara, Chuck, and their son, Ethan. Ethan had bright eyes and a smile that could melt anyone's heart. He was kind, smart, and full of energy. Every morning before school, he kissed his mother's cheek and said, "I'll make you proud, Mama." Clara would smile back, but her heart always carried a heavy shadow, the secret she had buried deep inside her. Every year on Ethan's birthday, the same memory returned like a whisper: the storm, the crying babies, and her trembling hands that made the terrible switch. Sometimes at night, Clara would sit by Ethan's bed, watching him sleep. His face reminded her of Ruth's, the same dimple, the same sharp nose. And when he laughed, she sometimes saw Ruth's husband smile. Each time, her chest tightened. Chuck never knew the truth. He believed Ethan was truly their son, a miracle child who had survived the stormy night. He loved the boy dearly. "Clara," he would say proudly, "our son will be great one day." Clara would just nod and whisper, "Yes, he will." Meanwhile, across town, in a tall white mansion surrounded by flowers and shiny cars, Ruth Raymond sat in her big living room, staring at an old baby picture. Her son, or the boy she thought was her son, had died that same night years ago. The doctors had said it was a heart problem, and though she tried to move on, her heart never truly healed. She often looked out of her window at other children playing in her neighborhood and wondered what her own son would have been like if he had lived. Ruth's husband, Mr. Raymond, became busier with business. He traveled often, leaving Ruth alone in their big house. Money could buy anything, except the peace she longed for. One Saturday morning, fate began to stir again. Ethan's school had organized the citywide quiz competition, and children from many schools were coming, including the fancy Raymond International School, which was owned by Ruth and her husband. Ethan's small public school was one of the invited schools. Clara was so proud that she ironed Ethan's best clothes the night before, a neat white shirt and navy blue trousers. "Do your best, my son," she said, straightening his collar. "I will, Mama." Ethan grinned. At the big hall, the competition began. Parents filled the seats, clapping as each child answered questions. Ethan raised his hand often, answering with confidence. "The capital of France is Paris. The largest ocean is the Pacific Ocean." The crowd cheered for him. From the front row, Ruth watched, smiling at the bright young boy who spoke with such charm. Something about him pulled at her heart. After the competition, Ethan came first place. His small school celebrated loudly, and Clara's eyes filled with tears of pride. But as Ethan walked up to receive his prize from Ruth, something strange happened. Ruth looked at him closely, really closely, and froze. The boy's dimple, his smile, the tiny birthmark on his left arm, all looked too familiar. Her hands trembled as she gave him the trophy. "What's your name, young man?" she asked softly. "Ethan Okafor, Ma," he said with a proud smile. Ruth blinked quickly. The name echoed in her ears, Okafor. That was Clara's last name. She turned her head sharply, and there, standing among the crowd, was Clara herself. Their eyes met. For a moment, time stopped. Ruth's heart began to race. Clara's lips quivered, and she quickly looked away, pretending to fix Ethan's shirt. That night, Ruth couldn't sleep. She walked through her hallway, thinking about the boy she had seen. Something inside her whispered that the child looked too much like her husband to be just a coincidence. The next day, she drove to Ethan's school quietly and asked to see his records. When she saw Clara's name listed as his mother, she felt her knees weaken. Clara Okafor, she whispered. Could it be? Her mind spun back to the hospital 10 years ago, the night of the storm, the moment she had stepped out of her room and seen nurses rushing down the hall. The baby that had died, had it really been hers? She tried to brush the thought away, but it clung to her like glue. That evening, Ruth decided she had to see Clara. When she arrived at Clara's small yellow house, Ethan was outside playing with a toy car. He waved and smiled at her. Good evening, Ma. Ruth's heart skipped. Good evening, dear. Clara stepped out, surprised. Ruth. What a surprise. Ruth forced a smile. I came to see you, it's been a long time. Inside, the air was tense. Clara's hands trembled as she poured juice into a cup. Ruth looked around, noticing Ethan's pictures on the wall. He's a fine boy, Ruth said softly. Looks so familiar. Clara's heart thudded. He takes after my husband, she said quickly. Ruth's eyes didn't move from her face. Does he? There was a long silence. Only the ticking clock filled the room. Then Ruth smiled faintly. Well, it was nice seeing you again. But as she left, her eyes glistened with suspicion. That night, she called a private doctor friend and whispered, I need a DNA test done quietly. Please. 2 weeks later, Ruth sat in her car, her hands shaking as she held an envelope. She had gotten a small sample, a strand of Ethan's hair from a competition ribbon he left behind. Her heart pounded as she tore open the paper. Her eyes scanned the words, and her mouth dropped open. DNA match, 99.9%, biological mother, Ruth Raymond. Ruth gasped, covering her mouth. The truth struck her like lightning. Her baby had been swapped. She clutched the paper tightly, whispering, Clara, what have you done? And in that moment, the calm city of Silvercrest held its breath, for fate had just turned its wheel again. Days after Ruth saw the DNA result, she could barely eat or sleep. Each time she looked in the mirror, her heart ached with anger and disbelief. She kept whispering the same question over and over. Why, Clara? Why would you do this to me? But deep inside, she also wanted to know why. Maybe there was more to the story. So one cloudy afternoon, Ruth drove again to the small yellow house, this time, with the DNA paper clutched tightly in her hand. Clara was hanging clothes on the line when she saw the silver car pull up. Her face drained of color. She dropped the wet cloth she was holding and froze. Ruth stepped out, her eyes red from crying. Clara, she said quietly, we need to talk. Inside, the room was silent except for the ticking clock. Ethan was outside, playing with friends. The two women sat across each other, one trembling with guilt, the other shaking with pain. Ruth placed the folded paper on the table. Explain this, she whispered. Clara stared at the paper. She didn't even have to open it, she knew exactly what it was. Her hands began to shake. Tears filled her eyes. Ruth, her voice broke. Please, I never meant to hurt you. I was desperate. Ruth's eyes widened. Desperate? You stole my son, Clara, she cried. You let me bury a child that wasn't mine. Clara covered her face, sobbing. My baby was dying, Ruth. He wasn't breathing. The doctor said he might not make it through the night. I panicked. You had everything, the money, the comfort, the care. I just wanted my son to live a good life. Ruth stood up, tears streaming down her cheeks. So you took mine. You took my child and left me to mourn for 10 years. I'm sorry. Clara cried. Every day, I live with the guilt. Every time I look at him, I see you. I hear your laugh in his voice. I wanted to tell you, but I was too afraid. I thought God had already punished me. For a long moment, Ruth said nothing. The sound of children laughing outside drifted through the window. One of those voices was Ethan's, her son. Finally, Ruth whispered, "Where do we go from here?" That night, Ruth sat in her car outside Clara's house for hours, watching Ethan through the window. He was doing homework while Clara helped him spell words. They looked like a happy family, like something out of a dream Ruth could never have again. She pressed her hand to her chest and whispered, "He doesn't even know me." Tears rolled down her cheeks. The next day, Ruth spoke to her husband, Mr. Raymond, and showed him the DNA report. He was silent for a long time, then said quietly, "We'll handle this carefully. The boy deserves the truth." They decided to meet with Clara and Chuck the following weekend. When the day came, the air felt heavy with tension. They met at a quiet park in Silvercrest, a place filled with trees and soft wind. Ethan was asked to play nearby while the adults sat on a wooden bench. Ruth turned to Clara. "We can't keep living in a lie. He has to know someday." Clara's voice trembled. "He's still a child. It will break him." Mr. Raymond sighed. "And it's breaking us too." Just then, Ethan came running toward them, holding a butterfly he had caught gently in his hands. "Look, Mama. Look what I found," he said excitedly. Both women turned their heads. Ethan looked at Ruth and smiled politely. "Good afternoon, Ma." Ruth tried to smile back, but tears filled her eyes. She reached out slowly. "That's beautiful, dear." Ethan blinked, a little confused by the softness in her voice. Clara's hands clenched tightly in her lap. Her heart screamed, "Please don't take him from me." Days passed. Ruth began visiting often, bringing small gifts for Ethan, books, school shoes, snacks. Clara watched in silence as Ethan grew fond of Ruth. They would read stories together and laugh like they'd known each other forever. Then one afternoon, Ethan fell ill. He had been playing in the rain and developed a fever. Clara and Chuck rushed him to the hospital, the same Silvercrest General Hospital where it all began. The doctor said it was just malaria, but while running tests, they noticed something unusual, a rare blood condition that could only be treated with a family match. The doctor turned to Clara and Chuck and said, "We'll need blood from his parents for testing." Clara froze. Her throat went dry. The doctor took samples. Hours later, he returned, looking confused. "Mrs. Okafor," he said, "the results don't match. You and your husband are not biological matches for the boy." Chuck blinked. "What? That's impossible." The truth had finally come into the open. Clara began to shake. "Doctor, please," but she couldn't continue. Ruth walked into the hospital room just then, her eyes filled with tears. She held up a file and whispered, "Because he's my son." The room went silent. Ethan looked from one woman to the other, confused. "Mama, what does she mean?" Clara fell to her knees, crying. "I'm sorry, my son. I'm so sorry." Ruth knelt beside him too, holding his hand gently. "Ethan, sweetheart, you were switched when you were a baby. I'm your real mother." Ethan's eyes filled with tears. "So, Mama isn't my real mother?" he asked softly, turning to Clara. Clara shook her head, sobbing. "I may not have given birth to you, but I've loved you all your life." Ethan stood there, silent, tears rolling down his cheeks. Then he whispered, "You're both my mothers. Weeks later, Ruth tried to take Ethan home, but he grew weaker despite treatment. His body was tired, his spirit broken by the truth. One night, as both women sat by his hospital bed, Ethan whispered faintly, "Please don't fight anymore. I just want you both to smile." Clara and Ruth held his hands tightly, weeping. Moments later, Ethan took his last breath, the same way Noah had, years ago. The room filled with silence. Ruth cried out in pain. Clara collapsed beside the bed. The nurses ran in, but it was too late. At the funeral, the sky over Silvercrest was grey again, just like the night the story began. Two women stood side by side, dressed in black, holding hands tightly, bound forever by guilt, grief, and love. As the coffin was lowered, Ruth whispered, "He was too good for this world." And Clara replied through tears, "Maybe this is how God forgave us, by giving him peace."